Hey there, welcome to Educational Bedtime, the place where history gently guides you towards sleep. If these stories help you relax and spark your curiosity, subscribe to the channel and join us, a small community of curious minds who love to learn, even with their eyes closed. Tonight, we travel back over 1,000 years to Constantinople, the magnificent capital of the Byzantine Empire. Behind its golden domes and marble columns lay stories of unimaginable sacrifice, political intrigue, and human resilience. We'll explore the shadowed corridors of imperial power, where survival often came at the ultimate price. Imagine yourself settling into the comfort of your bed, as we step into a world where childhood could be stolen in an instant, where religious art could mean the difference between life and death, and where proximity to power often meant proximity to danger. Tonight's journey will take us through 4 distinct chapters of Byzantine life, each revealing the complex tapestry of an empire that bridged east and west for over 1,000 years. Let us begin in the most unlikely of places, with those who served the emperor most intimately, yet could never truly belong to any world they inhabited. Chapter 1. Castrated for the Crown. Your life as a Byzantine eunuch. The morning mist clings to the hillsides of rural Anatolia as you play outside your family's modest stone dwelling. You are 8 years old, the youngest of 4 children, and your world consists of helping tend your father's small olive grove and listening to your mother's evening stories by the fire. The year is 9045 CE, and you have no idea that this ordinary morning will be your last as a whole child. The sound of approaching horses breaks through the peaceful dawn. You watch with curious eyes as 3 men in fine robes dismount near your home. They speak in low tones with your father, gesturing occasionally in your direction. Your parents' faces grow pale, and your mother begins to weep quietly. You don't understand the transaction taking place, but gold changes hands, and suddenly you're being lifted onto a horse. Your small hands grip the saddle as your family grows smaller behind you. This is how it begins for you, as it began for thousands of boys throughout the Byzantine Empire. You are not being kidnapped, you are being purchased, selected for a life of imperial service that will demand the ultimate sacrifice. The trade in young boys for eunuch service represents one of the most systematic and calculated aspects of Byzantine imperial administration, a practice that spans centuries and involves elaborate networks of merchants, officials, and court intermediaries. Your selection is not random, but carefully considered based on your physical appearance, family background, and the subtle assessments made by men who have spent their lives identifying suitable candidates for palace service. The journey to Constantinople takes weeks. You travel with a small group of other boys, all roughly your age, all torn from their families for the same purpose. The men who guide you speak of the great honor awaiting you, of service to the emperor himself, of a life free from the struggles of common peasants. But you only want to go home. The caravan moves slowly through the ancient roads that connect the Insa's vast territories, passing through market towns where merchants hawk goods from distant lands, through mountain passes where Byzantine fortresses guard against northern raiders, and across broad plains where the empire's agricultural wealth stretches to every horizon. During these long days of travel, you begin to understand the scope of the world you are entering. The other boys in your group come from every corner of the empire. Some speak Greek with the accent of the Aegean island. Others converse in the Latin that still echoes through Italy's Byzantine territories, and a few chatter in languages you cannot identify, tongues from the empire's eastern frontiers, where Christianity meets Islam in an endless dance of conflict and commerce. Each boy carries his own story of separation, his own memories of family and home, that will gradually fade into the carefully constructed identity of imperial service. The merchants who oversee your journey are professionals in this specialized trade, men who understand both the imperial court's specific requirements and the complex logistics of moving human cargo across hundreds of miles of often dangerous territory. They maintain detailed records of each boy's origins, physical characteristics, and behavioral observations, information that will eventually determine your placement within the palace hierarchy. These men are not cruel by nature, but they view you and your companions as valuable investments requiring careful management, rather than as children deserving of compassion. As the great walls of Constantinople rise before you, towering 30 feet high and stretching for miles, you marvel at the city's magnificence. The golden dome of Hagia Sophia catches the morning light, and the harbour bristles with ships from every corner of the known world. This is the greatest city on earth, the New Rome, and you are about to become part of its most secretive inner workings. But first, you must be prepared. The procedure takes place in a small, sterile chamber within the palace complex, a room specifically designed for this purpose, and maintained according to medical practices refined over centuries of creating eunuchs for imperial service. You are too young to fully understand what is happening, but the pain is immediate and overwhelming. The palace physician works quickly, using techniques perfected through generations of practice, instruments crafted specifically for this procedure, and methods that balance speed with the need to ensure survival. Historical records from the period describe the castration process in clinical terms, but barely hint at the human suffering involved. The most common method involves the complete removal of both testicles and penis, though some procedures preserve the penis while removing only the testicles, depending on the intended role of the future eunuch. Hot oil is applied immediately to cauterize the wounds and prevent infection, while specially prepared bandages soaked in healing compounds cover the surgical site. For days afterward, you drift in and out of consciousness, attended by older eunuchs who whisper that the worst is over. Recovery is slow and painful. Many boys don't survive the procedure or the infections that follow. Contemporary sources suggest that mortality rates for the castration process could reach 30% or higher, making your survival a matter of both medical skill and fortunate circumstance. Those who do survive find themselves forever changed, not just physically, but in ways that will shape every aspect of their future lives. You are no longer quite male, yet you are not female either. You exist in a liminal space that will define your entire existence within the Byzantine court. The medical consequences of castration extend far beyond the immediate trauma of the procedure itself. Without the hormonal influences that guide normal male development, your body will follow a different path through adolescence and into adulthood. Your voice will never deepen with the onset of puberty, instead maintaining the high, clear tones that make eunuch choirs so distinctive in Byzantine religious ceremonies. Your skeletal development will differ from that of intact males, often resulting in unusual height and delicate bone structure that marks you as different from the moment you enter a room. As you heal, you begin to understand the Byzantine logic behind your transformation. Eunuchs cannot father children, cannot establish dynasties, cannot threaten the imperial bloodline. This makes you safe in the emperor's eyes, trustworthy with state secrets, suitable for intimate service, capable of rising to positions of great power without posing dynastic threats. Your castration is not cruelty but calculation, a surgical removal of ambition's most dangerous fuel. This logic pervades every aspect of Byzantine imperial administration, where the potential for rebellion or usurpation influences every appointment, every promotion, every grant of authority. The months of recovery also serve as your introduction to palace life. You learn to navigate the complex hierarchy of eunuchs that governs the imperial household. At the bottom are the recent arrivals like yourself, boys still adjusting to their new reality. Above you are the cubiculae, the bedroom attendants who dress the emperor and tend to his personal needs. Higher still are the praepiciae, eunuchs who have gained the emperor's trust and wield significant administrative power. At the apex of this hierarchy stand the grand chamberlains and palace officials, eunuchs whose influence extends throughout the empire and whose decisions affect the lives of millions. Your education begins immediately and encompasses far more than mere palace protocol. You learn to read and write in Greek, the administrative language of the empire, and to speak Latin for ceremonial purposes, though this ancient tongue grows less common with each passing generation. Mathematics becomes essential for the complex calculations required in imperial administration, from managing tax revenues to coordinating military supply chains. Geography lessons teach you the extent of the empire's territories, the locations of major cities and fortresses, the trade routes that connect Constantinople to markets in India, China, and the distant lands of Western Europe. The study of theology occupies a central place in your curriculum, for the Byzantine Empire considers itself the earthly representative of God's kingdom, and every aspect of imperial administration carries religious significance. You memorize vast portions of scripture, learn to distinguish between orthodox and heretical teachings, and develop the sophisticated theological vocabulary necessary for participation in the religious debates that frequently influence imperial policy. The iconoclastic controversies that will dominate later periods of Byzantine history are foreshadowed in these early lessons, as you learn to navigate the complex relationship between religious conviction and political expediency. Rhetoric and philosophy receive equal emphasis in your education, for the Byzantine court values eloquence and intellectual sophistication as marks of true nobility. You study the great orators of classical antiquity, learning to construct arguments, deliver speeches, and engage in the kind of intellectual discourse that characterizes imperial decision-making. Plato and Aristotle become your constant companions, their works interpreted through the lens of Christian theology, their insights applied to the practical challenges of governing a vast, diverse empire. The daily routine of your new life settles into a rhythm that will persist for years. We wake before dawn in the dormitory you share with other young eunuchs, your sleeping mat arranged in precise rows that mirror the order demanded throughout the palace. The architectural design of these dormitories reflects the Byzantine obsession with hierarchy and control, with each eunuch's position determined by his rank, length of service, and current standing in the complex web of palace politics. Even sleep becomes a statement about your place in the imperial order. The first duty of each day is attendance at morning prayers in the palace chapel, where you stand with hundreds of other servants, officials and courtiers in carefully arranged hierarchies. The chapel itself is a masterpiece of Byzantine architecture and decoration, its walls covered with mosaics depicting Christ's life and miracles, its ceiling soaring toward heaven in a physical representation of the empire's spiritual aspirations. The morning service follows ancient liturgical traditions that connect contemporary Byzantine Christianity to its earliest roots, yet the political undercurrents of these gatherings are unmistakable. Your voice, forever changed by your castration, joins the ethereal chorus of other eunuchs as you sing the morning hymns. The sound is haunting and beautiful, distinctly different from the voices of whole men. This unique vocal quality makes eunuchs particularly valued in religious ceremonies, their voices considered somehow more pure, more suited to addressing the divine. The theological justification for this belief draws on complex interpretations of scripture and early Christian writings, though the practical effect is to create another way in which your difference from normal men becomes a source of value within the imperial system. After prayers, you are assigned to your daily duties. As a novice, you begin with the most menial tasks, cleaning the marble floors of the imperial apartments, polishing the silver vessels used in religious ceremonies, tending to the exotic plants in the palace's numerous gardens. But even these simple duties require careful attention, for everything in the palace is scrutinized. Every detail reflects on the emperor's glory. The marble floors you clean are not merely functional surfaces but artistic statements, composed of stones quarried from the far corners of the empire, and arranged in patterns that tell stories of imperial conquest and divine favor. The silver vessels you polish carry their own histories and significance. Many bear inscriptions commemorating imperial victories, religious festivals, or diplomatic exchanges with foreign powers. Some pieces arrive as gifts from distant rulers, their exotic designs and precious materials offering glimpses into civilizations that exist at the edges of Byzantine knowledge. Others are crafted by the empire's own artisans, their techniques passed down through generations of craftsmen who consider their work a form of religious devotion as much as artistic expression. The palace gardens represent another dimension of imperial luxury and control over the natural world. These are not merely collections of plants but carefully orchestrated environments designed to demonstrate the empire's global reach and agricultural sophistication. Roses from Damascus fill the air with fragrances so intense they seem almost tangible, while fruit trees from Spain and North Africa provide exotic tastes throughout the growing season. Most prized are the specimens that arrive as diplomatic gifts, flowering trees from China that bloom in impossible colors, aromatic herbs from India that serve both culinary and medicinal purposes, and rare succulents from the African interior that seem to store sunlight in their thick leaves. The emperor's personal chambers are a world unto themselves, filled with silk tapestries depicting Christ's miracles, mechanical devices that seem to move by magic, and furniture inlaid with ivory and precious stones. You learn to move through these spaces like a ghost, present when needed, but invisible when not. The emperor must never be aware of the effort required to maintain his comfort, yet every detail of these chambers reflects centuries of accumulated wealth and artistic achievement. The silk tapestries alone represent years of labor by master weavers, Their threads dyed with pigments so expensive that the cost of a single hanging could feed a village for months. The mechanical devices scattered throughout the imperial apartments demonstrate the empire's technological sophistication and its connections to the broader medieval world. Water clocks track the hours with precision impossible to achieve through manual timekeeping, while automated musical instruments provide entertainment that seems to emerge from invisible sources. Some of these devices arrive as gifts from Arab caliphs or Chinese emperors, their exotic mechanisms offering tantalizing glimpses into foreign technological traditions, while others are created by Byzantine craftsmen who adapt and improve upon imported innovations. Your appearance begins to mark you as different from the moment you enter adolescence. Without the hormonal changes that transform other boys into men, you develop a soft, androgynous look that sets you apart from both male and female palace residents. Your skin remains smooth and unblemished, your frame slight and delicate, your features maintaining a youthful quality that will persist well into middle age. Palace servants learn to identify eunuchs at a glance, and you become accustomed to the particular quality of attention your appearance draws, part curiosity, part pity, part fear. The psychological isolation that accompanies your physical transformation proves perhaps the cruelest aspect of your new existence. You belong neither to the world of men nor women, neither to the palace nor to the common people outside its walls. Other servants maintain connections to families on the outside, speak of children and marriages, of normal human experiences forever denied to you. You learn to find companionship among your fellow eunuchs. But even these relationships are complicated by the fierce competition for imperial favor that characterizes palace life. The emotional toll of this isolation manifests in various ways throughout the eunuch community. Some of your companions withdraw into themselves, finding solace in religious devotion or intellectual pursuits that require no human connection. Others develop intense, if necessarily platonic, friendships that provide some measure of emotional support in an otherwise alienating environment. A few seem to thrive on the power and influence that eunuch status can provide, channeling their energies into the pursuit of advancement within the palace hierarchy. As you grow older and prove your reliability, you are granted access to more sensitive areas of the palace and more confidential aspects of imperial administration. You learn to read the emperor's moods, to anticipate his needs, to navigate the dangerous waters of court politics where a misinterpreted gesture or poorly timed comment can mean the difference between advancement and exile. Every conversation becomes a potential test of your loyalty and discretion. Every piece of information a possible weapon in the ongoing struggles for influence that characterize Byzantine court life. The emperor's private secretary, a eunuch named Bringas, who has served 3 emperors, becomes your mentor in the subtle arts of palace survival. Under his guidance, you learn the delicate balance between usefulness and ambition that determines a eunuch's fate within the imperial system. You discover how to agree without committing yourself to specific positions, how to deliver bad news without bearing responsibility for its consequences, how to be indispensable without appearing to threaten your superior's authority. These skills require constant practice and refinement, for the political landscape of the palace shifts constantly with each change in imperial favor or external circumstance. Bringas teaches you that power in Byzantium flows not from strength or noble birth, but from access to information and the ability to manage that information effectively. The eunuch who knows which trade routes are threatened by Arab raiders, which provincial governors are skimming tax revenues, which foreign ambassadors carry secret messages from hostile powers, possesses a form of wealth more valuable than gold or land, but this information must be deployed carefully, shared selectively, used to build alliances rather than simply to advance personal interests. The eunuch who hoards information jealously or uses it unwisely quickly finds himself marginalized or worse. Your education expands beyond mere palace protocol to encompass the full range of knowledge required for imperial administration. You study the complex legal codes that govern the empire, learning to distinguish between civil and ecclesiastical law, between ancient precedents and contemporary innovations. Military science becomes essential as you learn to read maps, understand supply logistics, and evaluate the strategic implications of fortress placement and troop movements. The empire's diplomatic relations require knowledge of foreign languages, customs, and political systems, for Byzantine foreign policy depends heavily on the intelligence gathered by palace officials who can interpret the subtleties of international communication. The years pass, and you watch other eunuchs rise and fall in imperial favor. Some achieve remarkable heights, becoming generals who command armies despite their physical limitations, administrators who govern provinces with populations in the hundreds of thousands, or religious leaders who influence church policy throughout the Christian world. Others disappear suddenly, their fates serving as stark reminders of the precarious nature of palace life. You learn to celebrate others' successes cautiously and to mourn their failures silently, for excessive emotion in either direction can be interpreted as evidence of dangerous political sympathies. The most successful eunuchs develop a form of emotional detachment that allows them to navigate the constant dangers of court life without losing their humanity entirely. They learn to form genuine friendships while maintaining the ability to sacrifice those relationships if political necessity demands it. They cultivate sincere religious devotion while using that devotion strategically to build alliances with ecclesiastical authorities. They develop real expertise in law, administration, or military affairs, while never forgetting that their knowledge serves ultimately to advance imperial interests rather than personal satisfaction. The loneliness never entirely leaves you, regardless of your success within the palace hierarchy. You watch the natural world through palace windows, observing the cycles of seasons, the flight of birds, the simple rhythms of life that continue beyond the artificial environment of the court. Sometimes you remember your parents' faces, wonder about the siblings you left behind, imagine the life you might have lived in that distant olive grove. But these thoughts are dangerous luxuries that threaten to undermine the careful emotional discipline required for survival in your current circumstances. Your body ages differently than those of whole men, a constant reminder of the price paid for your position within the imperial system. Without the hormonal changes that bring physical strength and secondary sexual characteristics, you maintain a youthful appearance well into middle age, though this eternal boyishness becomes both an asset and a burden. It proves useful for maintaining the emperor's trust, for the imperial mind associates physical maturity with potential threats to dynastic stability, but it also serves as a constant reminder of what was taken from you in childhood. The health complications that follow castration require careful management throughout your life. The tendency toward obesity that affects many eunuchs forces you to monitor your diet constantly, balancing the rich foods available in the palace with the need to maintain the physical appearance expected of court officials. Brittle bones result from hormonal deficiencies, making you more susceptible to fractures and requiring careful attention to physical activity. Most challenging of all is the melancholy that seems to settle over many eunuchs in their later years, a psychological burden that may result from social isolation, physical discomfort, or simple grief for the normal life that might have been. The religious life of the palace provides some measure of comfort and meaning in your otherwise artificial existence. You find solace in the beautiful liturgies that mark the passage of ecclesiastical time, the incense-filled ceremonies that connect earthly worship to heavenly realities, the sense of participating in something greater than palace politics. Many eunuchs become deeply devout, perhaps finding in their spiritual lives the fulfillment denied them in the physical world. You memorize countless prayers, participate in theological debates, and gradually develop a sophisticated understanding of Byzantine Christianity that rivals that of ordained clergy. Your theological education encompasses not only orthodox doctrine, but also the various heresies and alternative interpretations that compete for influence throughout the empire. The Monophysite controversy that will dominate later periods is already simmering during your service, while iconoclastic ideas circulate quietly among certain court factions. Your position as a eunuch provides a unique perspective on these debates, for your own liminal status between male and female parallels in some ways the theological questions about Christ's nature that divide the Christian world. The complex relationship between church and state that characterizes Byzantine governance becomes apparent through your daily exposure to imperial decision-making. Religious and political considerations intertwine in ways that make it impossible to separate spiritual from temporal concerns, and the emperor's role as both secular ruler and religious leader creates constant tensions that palace officials must navigate carefully. Your education in theology proves as important as your knowledge of law or administration, for nearly every policy decision carries theological implications that can affect the empire's relationships with both its own citizens and foreign powers. As night falls over Constantinople, you return to your modest quarters within the palace complex, carrying with you the weight of another day's careful navigation through the treacherous waters of court life. Your chambers are comfortable by the standards of the time, furnished with items that would represent luxury to most of the empire's citizens, yet sparse compared to the imperial apartments you serve daily. A small icon hangs on the wall, one of the few personal possessions permitted to palace eunuchs, its painted features providing a focus for evening prayers and private meditation. Outside your window, the city sleeps, unaware of the complex human dramas playing out within the palace walls. The merchants in the harbour districts count the day's profits from trade with distant lands, while artisans in their workshops prepare for tomorrow's labour on commissions that will eventually find their way into imperial collections. Farmers in the surrounding countryside tend animals and crops that will help feed the capital's hundreds of thousands of residents, and soldiers on the Great Walls maintain their vigilance against threats that could emerge from any direction. You are a guardian of the Empire's most intimate secrets, a servant of absolute power, and a victim of the same system that elevates you above your original station in life. Your sacrifice has bought you a place in history, though the price was paid in childhood innocence and the fundamental human right to choose your own destiny. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove your worth, new dangers to navigate in the endless struggle for survival and advancement that characterizes palace life. The shadows lengthen across the palace courtyards as Constantinople settles into another night of uneasy dreams, watched over by those who can never truly rest, never truly belong, yet who hold the very heart of the empire in their carefully manicured hands. Your story is one among thousands, each eunuch carrying his own memories of loss and adaptation, his own strategies for finding meaning in a life defined by sacrifice and service. Together you represent one of history's most systematic attempts to solve the problems of political loyalty and dynastic stability through the calculated mutilation of human beings. Yet within this system of organized cruelty, individual dignity and achievement remain possible. Some eunuchs become genuine scholars, their enforced celibacy freeing them to pursue intellectual interests with single-minded devotion. Others develop administrative skills that benefit the empire's millions of citizens, using their positions to implement policies that improve lives and strengthen institutions. A few even find ways to exercise compassion within the constraints of their roles, protecting the vulnerable and moderating the harsh edges of imperial power. The palace settles into its nighttime rhythms, with guards changing at regular intervals, night servants attending to their duties, and the eternal flame that burns before the imperial apartment serving as a reminder of the sacred nature of earthly authority. In a few hours the cycle will begin again, with morning prayers, daily assignments, and the constant negotiation of relationships that determines who rises and who falls in the complex hierarchy of imperial service. You close your eyes, knowing that survival depends on alertness, discretion, and the ability to balance personal preservation with the demands of imperial service. Tomorrow's challenges remain unknown, but your training and experience have prepared you for whatever tests await. You have learned to read the subtle signs that indicate shifts in political favor, to anticipate the needs of superiors before they are expressed, to provide counsel without appearing to exceed your authority. Your success within the palace system represents a form of triumph over the circumstances that brought you here, though it is a victory purchased at a cost that can never be fully calculated or repaid. In the quiet darkness of your chambers, you carry within yourself the accumulated wisdom of those who have learned to survive in one of history's most demanding and dangerous environments. Chapter 2. Theodora, the actress who conquered an empire. As the palace settles into its evening rhythm, and the eunuchs retire to their carefully ordered world, let us turn our attention to a very different story of survival and transformation. In the same Constantinople, where castrated boys learn to navigate imperial politics, a young woman was about to embark on perhaps the most extraordinary journey in Byzantine history, from the rough stages of the hippodrome to the very throne of the empire. Her name was Theodora, and her story begins not in marble halls but in the dust and noise of the circus world, where entertainment was rough, audiences were rowdy, and respectability was a luxury few could afford. The year is approximately 1497 CE, and you find yourself in the cramped quarters beneath the great hippodrome of Constantinople. The massive arena, capable of holding 100,000 spectators, thunders overhead with the roar of racing chariots and cheering crowds. But down here, in the maze of chambers and corridors that serve as dressing rooms, storage areas, and living quarters for the circus performers, life moves to a different rhythm entirely. The hippodrome represents far more than mere entertainment in Byzantine society, serving as a crucial venue for political expression, social identity, and economic opportunity. The massive structure, originally built by the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus and expanded by Constantine himself, stretches nearly 500 meters in length and 120 meters in width, its capacity rivaling the Great Circus Maximus in Rome. The arena's importance extends beyond its impressive dimensions, for it serves as the primary meeting place between the emperor and his people, the stage upon which imperial legitimacy is continuously performed and renewed. The underground chambers, where Theodora's story begins, form a complex world of their own, populated by performers, trainers, merchants, and the countless support staff required to maintain the elaborate spectacles that define Byzantine popular culture. These spaces buzz with activity from dawn until well past midnight, as performers prepare for the next day's events, artisans repair costumes and equipment, and the intricate logistics of arena management unfold in endless cycles of preparation and execution. The air is thick with the scents of sawdust, animal sweat, and the exotic perfumes worn by performers who understand that spectacle extends to every aspect of their presentation. Theodora is born into this world of controlled chaos. Her father, Acacius, serves as a bearkeeper for the Green faction, one of the two great circus teams that dominate not just entertainment but political life throughout the empire. The Blues and Greens represent far more than sports teams, functioning as quasi-political organizations with their own neighborhoods, their own churches, their own armies of supporters who regularly riot in the streets over everything from chariot races to theological disputes. These factions trace their origins back to the earliest days of the empire, when they served as convenient mechanisms for organizing popular opinion and channeling potentially dangerous social energies into relatively controlled outlets. The Green faction, to which Theodora's family belongs, traditionally draws its support from the merchant classes and urban artisans, though its membership includes citizens from every level of Byzantine society. The faction maintains its own stables, training facilities, and performance troops, while also functioning as a social welfare organization that provides support for widows, orphans, and disabled veterans. The political dimensions of faction membership become apparent during imperial ceremonies, when the organized cheering of Blues and Greens serves to demonstrate popular support for imperial policies, and during periods of crisis, when the factions can mobilize thousands of supporters in the streets of Constantinople. When Theodora is still a small child, her father dies suddenly, leaving her mother, Cappadocia, to support 3 young daughters in a world that offers few opportunities for respectable women. The Byzantine Empire, despite its Christian foundations, maintains many of the gender restrictions inherited from Roman law and Greek cultural traditions, severely limiting women's economic and social mobility. A widow without male protection faces particularly harsh circumstances, often forced to choose between destitution and the kind of compromises that respectable society condemns, but economic necessity demands. Cappadocia makes a desperate gamble that will determine her family's future, dressing her daughters in suppliant's clothing and leading them into the hippodrome during a race day, hoping to win the crowd's sympathy and secure her late husband's position for her new lover. The public nature of this appeal reflects the semi-democratic aspects of Byzantine circus culture, where popular opinion can sometimes override official decisions, and where the crowd's favor represents a form of political power that even imperial officials must respect. The spectacle of a widow's public plea transforms a private family crisis into a moment of civic theater, with political implications that extend far beyond the immediate circumstances. The Green faction, perhaps influenced by recent political disputes or simply unwilling to appear vulnerable to public pressure, ignores the widow's desperate appeal. But the Blues, sensing an opportunity to embarrass their rivals while demonstrating their own magnanimity, welcome the family with theatrical generosity that transforms tragedy into triumph. This moment of charity will prove more significant than anyone could imagine, for it places young Theodora under the protection of the Blue faction, setting her on a path that will eventually lead to the imperial throne. The incident also demonstrates the complex interplay between personal circumstances and political opportunities that characterizes life in Byzantine Constantinople. The Blue faction's adoption of Theodora's family provides immediate material relief, but it also introduces the young girl to a world of political sophistication and social complexity that few children of her class ever encounter. The faction maintains extensive networks throughout the empire, connecting local supporters with imperial officials, provincial governors, and foreign ambassadors. Through these connections, faction members gain access to information, opportunities, and forms of protection that would otherwise remain far beyond their reach. Theodora's early exposure to these networks will prove crucial to her later success, providing her with insights into the mechanics of power that few women of any class possess. As Theodora grows, she follows her older sister Comito into the world of stage performance. Though the transition from childhood to professional entertainer involves challenges that contemporary sources describe only obliquely, Byzantine theatre of this period represents a complex fusion of classical dramatic traditions, contemporary religious themes, and popular entertainment that pushes the boundaries of public decency while serving important social and political functions. The performances combine elements of comedy, mime, dance, and spectacle in ways that require performers to master multiple artistic disciplines, while maintaining the physical stamina necessary for the demanding performance schedules that characterize circus life. The theatrical world that Theodora enters is both more sophisticated and more dangerous than modern audiences might imagine. Performers are expected to be not only beautiful and talented, but also politically astute, capable of adapting their performances to reflect current events, popular opinions, and the subtle messages that faction leaders wish to communicate to their supporters. The most successful actresses develop reputations that extend far beyond their artistic abilities, becoming influential figures in their own right, who can affect public opinion and political outcomes through their performances and personal relationships. Theodora quickly develops a reputation for her beauty and her willingness to push theatrical boundaries even further than her contemporaries. She becomes known for performances that are both artistically compelling and deliberately shocking, recreating mythological scenes with a sensual boldness that leaves audiences gasping and talking for days afterward. Her most famous routine involves portraying the mythical queen Leda being seduced by Zeus in the form of a swan, a performance that reportedly requires her to partially disrobe while trained geese peck grain from her body. The routine becomes legendary not only for its erotic content, but also for its technical sophistication, requiring precise timing, animal training, and choreographic skills that few performers could master. But Theodora's intelligence and political awareness set her apart from other performers in ways that prove far more important than her theatrical innovations. As she learns to read the political currents that flow through Constantinople's entertainment world, understanding that the Hippodrome serves not just as a place of entertainment, but as a crucial venue for political expression and social commentary. The circus factions function as unofficial political parties, and their performers often find themselves at the center of larger social movements, religious controversies, and imperial policy debates that determine the empire's future direction. Her performances begin to incorporate subtle political messages that resonate with her blue faction supporters, while avoiding the kind of explicit commentary that could result in official persecution. She develops a repertoire of gestures, phrases, and dramatic techniques that convey complex political meanings through apparently innocent entertainment, demonstrating the sophisticated understanding of power and communication that will later serve her well in imperial politics. The contemporary sources suggest that her performances become so influential that rival factions attempt to recruit her, while imperial officials begin to take notice of her growing impact on public opinion. The financial rewards of theatrical success allow Theodora to achieve a level of economic independence, rare for women of her background, though this independence comes at the cost of social respectability that will follow her throughout her life. Successful performers in Byzantine circus culture can earn substantial incomes, particularly those who develop loyal followings among the wealthy patrons who sponsor elaborate private entertainments. Theodora's earnings allow her to dress in fine clothing, acquire expensive jewelry, and maintain a lifestyle that rivals that of respectable merchants' wives, though her profession prevents her from achieving the social status that such wealth would normally provide. Her beauty and wit attract the attention of powerful men, including provincial officials, wealthy merchants, and court functionaries who seek both entertainment and companionship. From the empire's most celebrated performers, she becomes the mistress of Hesibulus, a Syrian official whose appointment as governor of the Pentapolis in North Africa offers her an opportunity to escape the limitations of theatrical life and experience a different kind of existence. For Theodora, the relationship represents both a personal opportunity and a strategic move that demonstrates her understanding of how women can leverage relationships with powerful men to improve their circumstances. The journey to North Africa introduces Theodora to the broader world of imperial administration and provincial governance, providing her with first-hand experience of how the empire functions beyond the capital's sophisticated urban environment. The Pentapolis, consisting of 5 major cities along the North African coast, represents one of the empire's most prosperous and strategically important regions, controlling crucial trade routes between Egypt and the Western Mediterranean. As the governor's companion, Theodora gains insights into the complex challenges of provincial administration, the delicate balance between local autonomy and imperial control, and the personal relationships that often determine policy outcomes. For a brief time, Theodora experiences a different kind of life, one of relative luxury and stability far removed from the chaos and uncertainty of the hippodrome. The governor's residence provides her with servants, fine clothing, and access to the kind of refined society that her theatrical background had made impossible in Constantinople. She observes the daily operations of imperial government, learning how laws are implemented, taxes collected, and disputes resolved in the provinces that provide the empire with its wealth and strategic depth. This experience proves invaluable preparation for her later role as empress, giving her practical knowledge of administration that few women of any background possess. But the relationship with Hesperus gradually sours as political pressures and personal conflicts create tensions that cannot be resolved through compromise or accommodation. The specific causes of their break remain unclear in historical sources, though contemporary accounts suggest that Theodora's intelligence and independence clash with Hesperus's expectations of feminine subservience. The situation deteriorates rapidly, culminating in Hesperus's decision to abandon her in Alexandria, leaving her stranded hundreds of miles from home with no resources and no protection in a world where unaccompanied women face constant dangers. The abandonment in Alexandria represents a crisis that could easily have ended Theodora's story in poverty, prostitution, or death, the typical fates of women who found themselves alone and vulnerable in the ancient world. Instead, it becomes a transformative experience that shapes her character and provides her with the resilience and determination necessary for her later achievements. Alexandria, one of the ancient world's greatest cities, offers opportunities for those clever and resourceful enough to recognize and exploit them, though it also presents dangers that require constant vigilance and strategic thinking. The journey back to Constantinople becomes far more than a simple matter of transportation, evolving into an extended pilgrimage through the eastern provinces of the empire that exposes Theodora to religious, political, and cultural influences that will shape her worldview for the rest of her life. Traveling through Egypt, Syria, and Anatolia, she encounters the religious diversity that characterizes the Eastern Empire, where Orthodox Christianity competes with various alternative interpretations, local traditions, and foreign influences in a complex theological marketplace that reflects the broader cultural diversity of Byzantine civilization. In Alexandria and Antioch, she meets monophysite Christians who believe that Christ possesses only one nature, divine rather than the two natures, human and divine, taught by Orthodox Christianity. This theological distinction might seem abstract to modern minds, but it carries profound political implications in the religiously divided empire, where theological disputes often serve as proxies for broader conflicts over imperial authority, local autonomy, and cultural identity. The monophysite position appeals particularly to those who feel marginalized by the Orthodox establishment, including many women, ethnic minorities, and provincial populations who resent Constantinople's dominance. Theodora's conversion to monophysite Christianity represents both a spiritual journey and a strategic calculation that demonstrates her sophisticated understanding of the empire's religious and political landscape. The doctrine's emphasis on Christ's divine nature resonates with someone who has experienced the harsh realities of purely human existence, while its opposition to Orthodox establishment provides her with connections to influential networks of bishops, monks, and wealthy laypeople who operate parallel to but independent of official church hierarchies. These relationships will prove crucial to her later political success, providing her with sources of support and information that complement and sometimes contradict the official channels of imperial administration. The monophysite community's emphasis on charity, social justice, and care for the marginalized also appeals to Theodora's personal experience of vulnerability and exploitation. She witnesses firsthand how monophysite churches provide support for widows, orphans, and refugees, often filling gaps left by official imperial institutions that focus primarily on maintaining order and collecting taxes. Her involvement in these charitable activities provides her with practical experience in administration and leadership, while also building relationships with community leaders who will remember her kindness when she later seeks political support. When she finally returns to Constantinople, Theodora is a fundamentally changed woman, transformed by her experiences from a talented but provincial performer into a sophisticated political actor capable of operating effectively at the highest levels of imperial society. She abandons her theatrical career, adopting a more respectable lifestyle that reflects both her spiritual conversion and her strategic understanding of what will be required for future advancement. The transition involves significant personal sacrifice, as she gives up not only the financial rewards of performance but also the independence and creative expression that theatrical life provided. Her charitable work brings her into contact with members of Constantinople's intellectual and religious elite, including scholars, theologians, and court officials, who appreciate both her intelligence and her unique background. Unlike most women of her social level, Theodora possesses practical experience of imperial administration, direct knowledge of popular opinion and circus politics, and sophisticated understanding of religious controversy that makes her a valuable source of information and advice. Her house becomes a gathering place for discussions that range from theological speculation to political analysis, creating the kind of intellectual salon that plays crucial roles in shaping imperial policy. She establishes herself in a modest house in one of Constantinople's middle-class neighborhoods, carefully constructing a new identity that acknowledges her past while demonstrating her transformation. The house serves as more than mere residence, functioning as a center for monophysite religious activities and charitable work that gradually builds her reputation within alternative religious circles. She hosts prayer meetings, organizes aid for refugees from imperial religious persecution, and provides financial support for exiled bishops who maintain monophysite traditions despite official disapproval. These activities require careful management to avoid attracting unwanted attention from imperial authorities, while building the networks of loyalty and obligation that characterize successful political operations. Chapter 3: The Iconoclastic Wars. When art became heresy. The story we are about to explore spans over a century of religious warfare that fundamentally transformed Byzantine art, theology, and society in ways that continue to influence Eastern Christianity today. It is a tale of emperors who declared war on images, of monks who died protecting painted panels, of families torn apart by disputes over the nature of divine representation and the proper relationship between the material and spiritual worlds. It is the story of iconoclasm, literally the breaking of images, one of the most profound spiritual crises in Christian history, and a conflict that reveals the deepest tensions within Byzantine civilization. As we move deeper into our journey through Byzantine history, let us pause to contemplate one of the most mysterious and devastating conflicts ever to tear through the empire. Imagine walking through the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia today, marveling at its golden mosaics depicting Christ, the Virgin Mary, and countless saints whose painted eyes seem to follow your movement through the sacred space. Now imagine those same walls stripped bare, their precious images smashed to fragments, their golden tesserae scattered like fallen stars across marble floors that echo with the sound of hammers and chisels destroying centuries of artistic achievement. This destruction was not the work of foreign invaders or natural disaster, but of the Byzantines themselves, acting in the name of religious purity and theological correctness. Our journey begins in the year 726 CE, during the reign of Emperor Leo III, known to history as Leo the Azorean. After his origins in the mountainous region of southeastern Anatolia, the empire faces tremendous pressure from multiple directions, with Arab armies pressing against the eastern frontiers, Bulgarian tribes raiding the northern provinces, and within Constantinople itself theological disputes simmering beneath the surface of daily life that threaten to explode into open conflict. But what Leo is about to unleash will make these external threats seem simple by comparison, for he is preparing to challenge one of the most fundamental assumptions of Byzantine Christianity, and provoke a crisis that will tear the empire apart for more than a century. The political and military context that shapes Leo's decision cannot be understood without appreciating the existential crisis facing the Byzantine Empire during the early 8th century. The Arab conquests of the previous century have stripped away vast territories that provided the empire with agricultural wealth, tax revenues, and military recruits, while also demonstrating the apparent effectiveness of a monotheistic religion that rejects the use of religious images in worship. The Islamic prohibition against religious representation seems to correlate with military success, leading some Byzantine theologians to wonder whether Christian icon veneration might be provoking divine displeasure and weakening the empire's ability to defend itself against its enemies. The theological arguments that develop around this crisis draw on deep currents within Christian thought that stretch back to the earliest centuries of the Church's existence. The Old Testament prohibition against graven images, found in the Second Commandment, provides iconoclasts with scriptural authority for their position. While early Christian writers like Epiphanius of Salamis and Eusebius of Caesarea express suspicion about the use of visual representations in Christian worship, these ancient concerns about idolatry gain new urgency in the context of Islamic criticism of Christian practices, as Arab scholars and rulers repeatedly challenge the theological consistency of a religion that claims to worship one God, while surrounding itself with painted and sculpted representations of divine figures. Today, however, something is fundamentally different. A crowd has gathered around the palace gate, and imperial workmen are setting up scaffolding against the wall, with an efficiency that suggests careful planning and official authorization. Emperor Leo himself appears, flanked by bishops and court officials, his face displaying the stern determination of a ruler about to implement a decision of enormous consequence. The tension in the crowd becomes palpable as citizens begin to understand what they are about to witness, while the assembled clergy and officials demonstrate through their presence that this action carries the full authority of both church and state. Picture yourself as a citizen of Constantinople, on an ordinary morning in 726, making your way through the city's winding streets toward the great bronze gate of the imperial palace. You've grown accustomed to seeing the magnificent image of Christ that adorns the gate, the Christ Chalkites as it's known, a golden mosaic that has watched over the city for generations. Pilgrims from throughout the Christian world touch the wall beneath it for blessing. Children grow up seeing it as their first image of the divine, and even hardened soldiers bow their heads as they pass beneath its benevolent gaze. The image has become so integral to the city's identity that it seems as permanent as the walls themselves, a visual symbol of the divine protection that has preserved Constantinople through countless crises and invasions. What happens next sends shockwaves through the crowd and establishes a precedent that will influence Byzantine religious policy for the next century. With deliberate ceremony that emphasizes the official nature of the destruction, the workmen begin to hack away at the sacred image, each blow of the hammer sending fragments of golden glass cascading to the ground like tears from heaven itself. Each piece that falls draws gasps and cries from the watching crowd, some citizens weeping openly at the destruction of an image they have venerated since childhood, others falling to their knees in prayer for divine intervention, and a few brave souls beginning to shout protests despite the obvious danger of opposing imperial policy so publicly. But the guards maintained strict order, keeping the crowd at a safe distance while the work continues with methodical precision that transforms artistic destruction into a form of religious ritual. The systematic nature of the demolition reflects careful planning and theological consultation, as the emperor and his advisors have clearly considered both the practical and symbolic dimensions of this unprecedented action. The destruction proceeds slowly enough to allow observers to witness every detail, ensuring that the theological message embedded in the act reaches the maximum possible audience and establishes clear precedents for future iconoclastic activities throughout the empire. But Leo's reasoning extends beyond purely theological considerations to encompass political and cultural factors that reveal the complex motivations underlying iconoclastic policy. The emperor has observed that Christian communities under Arab rule, communities that have largely abandoned the use of religious images under Islamic influence, seem to prosper under Muslim governance, while maintaining their Christian identity. Meanwhile, the icon-venerating Byzantine Empire suffers military defeat after military defeat, losing territory, population, and prestige in conflicts that seem to demonstrate divine disfavor. Perhaps, Leo concludes, God is punishing the empire for its idolatrous practices and will restore his favor only when these corrupting influences are eliminated from Christian worship. The destruction of the Christ Chalkites represents far more than mere artistic vandalism, embodying instead a theological statement of revolutionary proportions that challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of Christian worship and the proper relationship between the material and spiritual worlds. Leo III has concluded that the veneration of religious images constitutes idolatry, a violation of the Second Commandment's prohibition against graven images that has corrupted Christianity and provoked divine displeasure. In his mind, he is not destroying sacred art, but purifying Christianity, returning it to its primitive purity and cleansing the empire of practices that have led God to withdraw his protection and allow the devastating Arab conquests of recent decades. The theological arguments against icons that developed during this period draw on sophisticated philosophical and scriptural analysis that reflects the high level of intellectual discourse characteristic of Byzantine religious debate. Iconoclastic theologians argue that the infinite and invisible God cannot be contained or adequately represented in finite material substances, like wood and paint, and that any attempt to do so necessarily diminishes the divine nature by reducing it to human comprehension. They point to the incarnation of Christ as the only legitimate image of God, arguing that painted representations compete with the true image of God found in the person of Jesus, and therefore constitute theological error, as well as practical idolatry. The iconoclastic position also draws on concerns about the economic and social power that has accumulated around major icon shrines throughout the empire, as miraculous images attract pilgrims, whose donations support elaborate monastic establishments that compete with imperial authority. Some iconoclastic arguments suggest that icon veneration has created a parallel economy that diverts resources from imperial defense and administration, while also fostering superstitious practices that undermine rational theological discourse and political decision-making. The destruction of icons thus serves not only religious but also economic and administrative purposes, redirecting wealth and attention toward more practical concerns of imperial governance and military preparation. But the arguments in favor of icons prove equally compelling and carry far more emotional resonance for most Byzantines, who have grown up surrounded by religious images that provide comfort, inspiration, and tangible connections to the divine realm. Icon defenders argue that these sacred images are not idols but windows into heaven, tools that help the faithful focus their prayers and meditations rather than objects of worship in themselves. They emphasize the difference between veneration and worship, pointing out that Christians honor icons as representations of divine figures without confusing the image with the reality it depicts. The tradition of icon veneration stretches back to the earliest days of Christianity, they argue, and surely centuries of saints and martyrs cannot have been mistaken about such a fundamental aspect of Christian practice. The theological defense of icons develops sophisticated philosophical arguments about the relationship between image and prototype that demonstrate the intellectual rigor of Byzantine religious thought. Icon supporters argue that veneration of an image transfers automatically to the person represented, so that honoring an icon of Christ actually honors Christ himself, rather than the material substances from which the icon is constructed. They point to biblical precedents for the religious use of images, including the bronze serpent erected by Moses and the elaborate decorations of Solomon's temple, while also arguing that Christ's incarnation legitimizes the representation of divine figures in human form. These arguments create a comprehensive theological framework for icon veneration that addresses iconoclastic concerns while maintaining traditional Christian practices. The psychological trauma of witnessing such destruction extends far beyond the loss of material objects to encompass the shattering of spiritual relationships and communal identity that icons had helped to maintain. For Byzantine Christians, these images serve as focal points for personal prayer, family devotion, and community worship in ways that make their absence feel like spiritual abandonment. The sudden elimination of visual aids to prayer forces believers to reconstruct their entire approach to worship and meditation, while the official condemnation of practices they had considered sacred creates profound confusion about the nature of legitimate Christian faith and the reliability of religious authority. As Leo's iconoclastic policy spread throughout the empire, the human cost becomes staggering, in both immediate destruction and long-term cultural devastation. Imagine yourself as a monk in a remote monastery, where generations of your predecessors have lovingly created and preserved sacred images that represent the accumulated spiritual wisdom and artistic achievement of your community. One morning, imperial officials arrive with orders to destroy every icon in your possession, backed by military force sufficient to overcome any resistance you might consider. You watch helplessly as paintings that took months to complete are tossed into fires, as carved ivory panels are smashed with hammers, and as illuminated manuscripts are torn apart, page by page, in systematic destruction that eliminates centuries of cultural achievement in a matter of hours. Some monastic communities choose resistance despite the obvious dangers, leading to confrontations that demonstrate both the depth of religious conviction and the brutal efficiency of imperial enforcement. At the monastery of St. Stephen in Constantinople, monks barricade themselves inside their buildings, rather than surrender their most precious icons, creating a siege situation that attracts attention throughout the city. When imperial troops finally break down the doors, they discover that the monks have attempted to preserve their spiritual treasures through elaborate concealment schemes, hiding images behind false walls, burying them in garden plots, and smuggling them to sympathetic supporters in the city who risk their own safety to preserve these remnants of traditional Christianity. But the soldiers prove thorough in their searches, employing techniques developed through military engineering and criminal investigation to locate hidden religious materials. The systematic nature of these searches reveals the extent of imperial planning and the determination to implement iconoclastic policies completely, rather than allowing partial compliance that might undermine the theological principles at stake. The destruction that follows demonstrates the collision between religious conviction and political authority, as objects that monks consider sacred relics become evidence of disobedience that must be eliminated to maintain imperial legitimacy and religious consistency. The persecution extends far beyond mere property destruction to encompass systematic attacks on individuals who refuse to abandon icon veneration or who actively oppose iconoclastic policies. Monks who persist in defending traditional practices face imprisonment, exile, or physical punishment designed to serve both as individual deterrent and public example. John of Damascus, one of the most eloquent defenders of icon veneration, finds himself forced to flee to territories controlled by the Arab Caliphate, where, ironically, he discovers more religious freedom than exists in the Christian Empire. Other theologians suffer more direct persecution, with some having their tongues cut out to prevent them from continuing their oral advocacy, while others lose their hands in punishment specifically designed to prevent the creation of written defenses of traditional Christian practices. Yet resistance persists in unexpected ways that demonstrate the creativity and determination of communities committed to preserving their religious traditions despite official persecution. Archaeological excavations conducted in recent decades have revealed the ingenious methods that icon supporters develop to protect their spiritual treasures, using techniques that reflect both desperate circumstances and sophisticated understanding of concealment strategies. In monastery walls across the former Byzantine territories, investigators continue to discover hidden chambers containing carefully wrapped icons, preserved in perfect condition for over a millennium. The preservation techniques employed in these hiding places demonstrate advanced knowledge of conservation methods, including the use of climate control, protective wrapping, and chemical treatments that prevent deterioration during extended storage periods. The impact on Byzantine art proves both immediate and catastrophic, as workshops that have produced religious images for centuries suddenly find their entire output declared illegal, and their traditional skills rendered worthless. Master craftsmen who have spent their lives perfecting the delicate techniques of mosaic work, icon painting, and religious sculpture must either flee the empire or find entirely different ways to make a living in an economy that no longer values their expertise. The transmission of artistic knowledge from master to apprentice, a process that normally preserves and develops cultural traditions across generations, faces complete disruption as young people avoid training in fields that offer no legitimate employment opportunities. The destruction of artistic workshops represents more than economic disruption, embodying instead the systematic elimination of cultural knowledge and technical expertise that had accumulated over centuries of artistic development. The specific techniques required for creating traditional Byzantine religious art, including the preparation of pigments, the application of gold leaf, and the mathematical principles underlying mosaic composition, exist primarily in the memories and habits of working craftsmen rather than in written manuals. When these artisans are forced to abandon their trades, much of this knowledge disappears permanently, creating gaps in cultural continuity that will affect Byzantine art production for centuries even after icon veneration is officially restored. The resistance movement develops its own sophisticated network of communication and mutual support that operates parallel to official imperial institutions. Using techniques borrowed from both military organization and commercial trade to coordinate activities across vast geographical distances, secret monasteries continue to function in remote mountain regions, their locations known only to trusted networks of supporters who provide food, supplies, and information, while maintaining the secrecy necessary for survival. These hidden communities serve as centers for the preservation of traditional Christian practices, the training of clergy committed to icon veneration, and the production of religious art that keeps traditional techniques alive despite official prohibition. Church floors throughout the empire conceal buried reliquaries, filled with miniature religious paintings and carved ivory panels. often accompanied by documents that identify the objects and explain the circumstances of their concealment. These archaeological discoveries provide direct evidence of the systematic resistance that iconoclastic policies encountered, while also revealing the extent of community cooperation required to hide large numbers of religious objects without detection by imperial authorities. Even private homes yield secret caches of religious art, hidden in specially constructed compartments that demonstrate the risks ordinary families accepted to preserve their spiritual possessions. Coded messages pass between communities of icon venerators using innocent-seeming commercial correspondence and religious communications that conceal their true purposes through elaborate systems of symbolic reference and indirect language. The development of these communication networks demonstrates the intellectual sophistication of the resistance movement, as well as the determination of communities to maintain contact, despite the obvious dangers of detection and punishment. Women play particularly important roles in this underground network, using their relative freedom of movement within domestic and religious spaces to hide and transport banned religious objects, while serving as messengers between separated communities of believers. The challenge of maintaining Christian faith without traditional visual supports leads some believers to develop more intense forms of internal spirituality that emphasize direct divine encounter over mediated religious experience. The iconoclastic period witnesses a flowering of mystical theology and contemplative practice, as Christians seek spiritual experiences that require no material aids and cannot be eliminated through imperial decree. Monastic communities that survive the persecutions often develop sophisticated meditation techniques, complex theological systems, and elaborate liturgical practices that compensate for the absence of visual religious art through enhanced emphasis on music, poetry, and ritualized movement. The psychological and spiritual impact of iconoclasm extends far beyond the immediate loss of artistic objects, to encompass fundamental changes in how Byzantine Christians understand and practice their faith. For generations of believers, icons had served as essential focal points for personal prayer, family devotion, and community worship, providing visual narratives that helped structure religious understanding and emotional connection to divine figures. Their sudden absence creates a spiritual vacuum that many believers struggle to fill, forcing them to develop entirely new approaches to prayer and meditation that do not depend on visual aids or material intermediaries. But for many other Christians, the absence of icons feels like spiritual abandonment, as if God himself has been banished from their daily lives through the elimination of the visual reminders that had provided comfort, guidance, and assurance of divine presence. The theological confusion created by official condemnation of practices they had considered sacred undermines confidence in religious authority and creates doubt about the fundamental principles of Christian faith. Some believers abandon regular religious practice entirely, while others seek spiritual guidance from underground networks that maintain traditional approaches despite the obvious risks of persecution and punishment. The first period of iconoclasm lasts for 60 years, ending officially in 7087 CE, when Empress Irene convenes the Second Council of Nicaea to address the theological controversies that have divided the empire for nearly 3 generations. This ecumenical council, attended by bishops from throughout the Christian world, formally restores the veneration of icons and condemns iconoclasm as heresy that violates fundamental principles of Christian faith and practice. The theological arguments presented during the council demonstrate the intellectual sophistication that has developed on both sides of the controversy, while the final decision reflects both careful scriptural analysis and practical recognition of the social and cultural damage that iconoclastic policies have inflicted on Byzantine Christianity. The restoration brings scenes of wild celebration throughout the empire, as communities that have preserved icons in secret finally feel safe to display them publicly, while artists and craftsmen begin the long process of recreating the religious art that systematic destruction had eliminated. Churches that had stood empty of decoration for decades suddenly fill with new mosaics, frescoes, and painted panels, as communities compete to demonstrate their renewed commitment to traditional Christian practices. The speed and enthusiasm of this artistic renewal reveals the extent of demand that had accumulated during the iconoclastic period, while also demonstrating the survival of artistic techniques and cultural knowledge, despite official attempts at systematic elimination. But the celebration proves premature, as political changes bring new challenges to those who hope that the restoration of 787 represents permanent victory for traditional Christianity. In 8015 CE, Emperor Leo V initiates a second wave of iconoclastic persecution that proves in many ways more systematic and devastating than the first, as imperial authorities have learned from the survival strategies employed by the underground resistance movement during the earlier period. This second iconoclasm implements more thorough search procedures, imposes harsher penalties for violations, and works more actively to co-opt church hierarchy in support of imperial religious policies, through a combination of inducements and threats that prove effective in reducing organized clerical opposition. Perhaps most intriguingly, archaeologists have uncovered evidence that some religious communities developed theological compromises during the second iconoclastic period that avoided the most controversial aspects of traditional icon veneration while maintaining some form of visual religious art. Rather than abandoning religious imagery entirely, these communities created decorative programs that emphasized abstract patterns, symbolic representations, and theological concepts rather than direct depictions of divine figures. These compromise solutions demonstrate the creativity with which communities sought to balance religious conviction with political survival, while also revealing the flexibility that characterizes Byzantine Christianity's approach to theological and artistic challenges. The archaeology of this second iconoclastic period reveals evidence of even more sophisticated concealment and preservation techniques, as communities apply lessons learned during the first persecution to develop improved methods for protecting their religious treasures. Recent excavations have discovered multi-layered hiding systems that could preserve icons through extended periods of official hostility, including waterproof containers, climate-controlled storage chambers, and elaborate decoy systems designed to satisfy imperial searchers while protecting the most valuable religious objects. These archaeological discoveries demonstrate the evolution of resistance techniques and the increasing sophistication of preservation methods that reflect both desperate necessity and accumulated experience. The renewal of iconoclastic persecution after nearly 30 years of official tolerance creates particularly severe psychological trauma for communities that had believed the controversy permanently resolved, forcing them to hide newly created religious art and rebuild resistance networks that many had hoped would no longer be necessary. The second period of destruction targets not only traditional icons, but also the new religious art created during the Restoration period, eliminating in some cases the same religious objects twice, and demonstrating the determined efficiency of imperial enforcement mechanisms. The persistence of imperial opposition to icon veneration forces believers to confront the possibility that their religious practices might never receive permanent official acceptance, creating a sense of siege mentality that influences Byzantine Christianity for centuries even after the final restoration. The psychological aftermath of iconoclasm shapes Byzantine culture for centuries through its impact on how artists, theologians, and ordinary believers approach questions about the relationship between faith and material culture. Artists who work on religious subjects after the Restoration display new self-consciousness about their work's theological implications, often incorporating subtle references to the iconoclastic period that celebrate the triumph of traditional Christianity while acknowledging the struggles that preservation required. The elaborate artistic programs that adorn later Byzantine churches frequently include symbolic elements that commemorate the survival of icon veneration, creating visual narratives that serve both as religious inspiration and historical memory of the community's successful resistance to official persecution. The theological synthesis that develops during and after the iconoclastic period creates intellectual frameworks that influence Eastern Christianity for centuries, establishing principles about the relationship between image and prototype that become central to Orthodox theological understanding. The careful distinctions between veneration and worship that icon defenders develop in response to iconoclastic criticism provide theological tools for addressing similar controversies in later periods, while the sophisticated philosophical arguments about divine representation contribute to broader theological discussions about the incarnation, the nature of God, and the proper relationship between creator and creation. These intellectual achievements demonstrate how theological controversy can stimulate creative thinking and produce lasting contributions to religious understanding. The final restoration of icons in 843 CE, known throughout Byzantine history as the triumph of orthodoxy, marks far more than just the end of a theological dispute between competing interpretations of Christian doctrine. It represents instead a fundamental transformation in Byzantine Christianity's understanding of the relationship between material and spiritual worlds, the proper role of art in religious life, and the limits of imperial authority over matters of religious conscience and community practice. The church that emerges from the Iconoclastic period possesses a more sophisticated theology of religious images, a deeper appreciation for the spiritual and cultural functions that art serves in Christian worship, and stronger institutional mechanisms for preserving traditional practices against future imperial interference. But perhaps the most profound legacy of the Iconoclastic wars lies in their demonstration of art's power to embody and transmit spiritual experience in ways that make it both essential to religious communities and threatening to political authorities seeking to control religious expression. The very ferocity of the attacks on religious images testifies to their perceived effectiveness as vehicles for divine encounter and community identity, while the determined resistance that icon veneration inspired reveals the depth of spiritual attachment that visual art can create when it successfully mediates between human experience and divine reality. No political authority destroys what it believes to be powerless, and the iconoclasts' passionate opposition to religious art acknowledges its spiritual potency, even while seeking to eliminate its influence. Modern visitors to surviving Byzantine churches often report being profoundly moved by the intensity and spiritual presence of the restored religious images, by their sense of emotional immediacy and theological sophistication that seems to transcend the limitations of their material composition. What contemporary observers experience is partly the result of the iconoclastic period itself, as the passionate conviction of those who risked everything to preserve these sacred images has somehow infused them with additional layers of meaning and spiritual power that reflect the accumulated faith and sacrifice of generations who refuse to abandon their religious traditions despite official persecution and the constant threat of punishment. The fragments of destroyed mosaics that archaeologists continue to uncover across former Byzantine territories serve as poignant reminders of this conflict's human cost and the cultural wealth that systematic persecution eliminated from the medieval world. Each piece of shattered glass once caught and reflected light in ways specifically designed to elevate the human spirit, to provide comfort to the grieving, hope to the desperate, and focus for those seeking spiritual meaning in an often hostile world. Their destruction represents not merely the loss of individual artistic achievements, but the severing of countless personal relationships with the divine that had provided meaning, comfort, and guidance through the challenges of daily life in a demanding and often dangerous world. The resistance movements that preserved icon veneration against sustained imperial persecution offer different models of religious conviction characterized by patient endurance, creative adaptation, and willingness to sacrifice immediate safety for long-term preservation of spiritual values. The monks who concealed sacred images in monastery walls and the families who risked their lives to maintain traditional Christian practices could not have known whether their efforts would ultimately succeed, yet they acted in faith that truth and beauty possess resilience that outlasts the political powers seeking to destroy them. Their example demonstrates how religious communities can maintain their essential identity and practices, even under extreme pressure, while also showing how cultural preservation often depends on the courage and creativity of ordinary individuals rather than institutional authorities. The iconoclastic period also raises fundamental questions about the relationship between political power and religious truth that remain relevant to contemporary discussions about the proper boundaries of governmental authority over matters of conscience and religious practice. The Byzantine emperors who initiated and sustained these campaigns genuinely believed they were serving God's will and promoting the empire's spiritual welfare, yet their policies caused immense suffering and cultural devastation while failing to achieve their stated goals of religious purification and military success. The historical record suggests that sincere religious conviction, when combined with absolute political power and systematic enforcement mechanisms, can produce consequences as destructive as any secular tyranny and create forms of persecution that violate the very principles they claim to serve. As we contemplate this strange and terrible chapter in Byzantine history, we might recognize parallels to our own time in the ongoing tensions between religious freedom and political authority, between traditional practices and official reform movements, and between the preservation of cultural heritage and the demands of contemporary political correctness. The impulse to purify religious expression by eliminating elements considered inappropriate or theologically questionable continues to surface throughout Christian history, from the Protestant Reformation's campaigns against religious imagery to contemporary debates about the proper role of art, beauty, and material culture in spiritual life and community worship. Tonight, as Constantinople sleeps under its ancient stars, The surviving icons in the city's churches continue their silent witness to this extraordinary period of conflict, destruction, and ultimate renewal. Their golden faces reflect centuries of prayer and devotion, their painted eyes seeming to watch over communities that have inherited both the artistic treasures and the spiritual resilience that iconoclastic persecution could not destroy. The mystery of why an empire would turn so violently against its own artistic and spiritual traditions may never be fully solved, but the story of these traditions' ultimate survival offers hope that truth and beauty possess an inherent power that outlasts the political forces seeking to eliminate them. In the quiet contemplation of surviving Byzantine mosaics and painted panels, contemporary observers encounter not just artistic masterpieces, but the distilled experience of generations who struggled to preserve the sacred in an often hostile world. These images carry within themselves the accumulated faith, sacrifice, and determination of countless individuals who chose to risk everything rather than abandon what they considered essential to their spiritual lives and community identity. Their survival serves as testimony to the human capacity for both destruction and preservation, for theological passion and artistic creation, for the breaking of sacred images, and their ultimate restoration through the patient faith of those who refuse to let beauty and meaning disappear from the world. Chapter 4: Behind Palace Walls. The Decadent Lives of Byzantine Nobles. As our journey through Byzantine Constantinople draws toward its close, let us step away from the struggles of eunuchs, the determination of empresses, and the fury of religious wars to explore a very different aspect of imperial life that reveals the extraordinary heights of luxury and sophistication that human civilization can achieve when wealth, power, and artistic vision combine in pursuit of beauty and comfort. Behind the massive walls of the Great Palace, beyond the reach of common citizens and even most courtiers, lay a world of almost unimaginable refinement and elaborate ceremony that seems to exist in a realm entirely separate from the harsh realities of medieval life. Here, surrounded by mechanical marvels and artistic treasures gathered from every corner of the known world, the Byzantine elite lived lives of such refined decadence that they appear almost mythical to our modern understanding of what luxury and sophistication can encompass. Imagine yourself now not as a castrated servant navigating the dangerous currents of palace politics, not as a determined actress rising from poverty to imperial power, not as a monk protecting sacred images from official destruction, but as a member of the highest aristocracy, born into a family whose wealth stretches back through generations of successful imperial service, and whose influence extends throughout the empire's vast territories and complex administrative systems. Your world is one of silk and gold, of ceremonies so intricate they require teams of specialists to orchestrate properly, of pleasures so exotic that they must be imported from the very edges of the earth itself. Every aspect of your existence reflects the accumulated wealth and cultural sophistication of an empire that has dominated the Eastern Mediterranean for over 1,000 years. The morning begins for you not with the harsh tolling of bells that wakes the palace servants at dawn, but with the gentle music of a mechanical organ that plays automatically as the sun reaches a precisely calculated angle in your private courtyard. This marvel of Byzantine engineering, crafted by the empire's most skilled artisans, combines water power with intricate bronze mechanisms to create melodies that seem to emerge from the air itself, as if the very architecture of your residence has been designed to sing you awake. The music serves as your personal dawn, a reminder that your life operates according to rhythms far removed from the ordinary concerns of your subjects, and the practical necessities that govern the existence of even wealthy merchants and provincial governors. Your bedroom within the Great Palace complex represents a testament to the empire's global reach and the artistic sophistication that centuries of accumulated wealth and cultural exchange have made possible. The walls are covered with silk tapestries depicting scenes from classical mythology, woven by master craftsmen in imperial workshops using techniques so closely guarded that the penalty for revealing their secrets to foreigners is death by torture. The silk itself originates in the distant kingdom of China, carried along trade routes that span half the known world, its production a mystery that the empire has spent enormous sums attempting to unravel and reproduce within its own territories through a combination of industrial espionage, diplomatic negotiation, and outright theft of both materials and expertise. The floor beneath your feet constitutes a marvel of marble inlay work that creates geometric patterns so mathematically complex they seem to shift and move as you walk across them, producing optical illusions that demonstrate the advanced understanding of perspective and visual psychology that Byzantine artisans have developed through centuries of experimentation and refinement. Each piece of marble has been selected not merely for its beauty, but for its specific geographic origin and symbolic significance. Purple porphyry from Egypt, quarried from sites that can only be worked by imperial permission, represents the divine nature of imperial authority through its association with Christ's royal blood. A white marble from the Greek islands catches and reflects light like captured snow, creating an impression of purity and transcendence that connects your private space to the celestial realm. A green serpentine from Thessaly seems to glow with its own inner fire, suggesting the mysterious forces that animate the natural world and connect earthly existence to divine purpose. As you wake from sleep, you do not simply rise and dress as common people must do, but instead participate in an elaborate ceremony attended by a carefully selected team of servants, whose roles have been refined through centuries of court tradition, and whose every movement reflects the systematic approach to luxury that characterizes Byzantine palace life. First appears the Prepositus Cubiculi, the chief chamberlain who oversees your personal household, a eunuch whose story may have begun like that described in our first segment, but who now holds a position of enormous trust and influence within the imperial hierarchy. This individual manages not only your daily comfort but also your political communications, your personal security, and the complex web of relationships that determine your standing within the constantly shifting landscape of court politics and imperial favor. The ritual of dressing requires nearly an hour and involves garments whose complexity and symbolic significance defy modern understanding of clothing as mere practical covering for the human body. Your underclothing consists of silk, so fine it feels like wearing light itself, dyed with colors, extracted from rare mollusks, exotic insects, and precious minerals that cost more per yard than most imperial subjects earn in an entire year of labor. Over this foundation goes a dalmatic, a long tunic, decorated with golden embroidery depicting Christian symbols interwoven with imperial eagles and lions, creating a visual narrative that tells the story of your family's service to the empire while also proclaiming your personal devotion to the Christian faith that legitimizes Byzantine political authority. The embroidery work alone represents months of intensive labor by the empire's most skilled artisans, each thread positioned with mathematical precision to create patterns that function simultaneously as artistic achievement, religious statement, and political declaration. But the true marvel of aristocratic dress lies in the outer garments that mark your exalted position within the imperial hierarchy. The scaramangion and the imperial chlamys, whose design, materials, and method of wearing communicate complex information about your rank, your current political standing, and your relationship to the emperor himself. These cloaks are fastened with brooches made from precious stones arranged in patterns that correspond to your specific position within the court's elaborate system of precedence and honor. The largest stones are sapphires from Ceylon and emeralds from India, some so large and perfectly formed that they are individually famous throughout the empire and possess their own histories, legends, and associations with particular imperial victories or divine interventions. The craftsmanship required to set these stones involves techniques so sophisticated that only a handful of artisans in each generation possess the necessary skills, making each brooch not merely an ornament but a masterpiece of human artistic achievement. Your morning meal takes place not in a simple dining room, but in a chamber specifically designed to showcase the empire's wealth, sophistication, and connections to the broader medieval world. The table itself has been carved from a single piece of marble quarried in the distant mountains of Phrygia, its surface polished to mirror perfection, and inlaid with precious metals, forming elaborate vine patterns that symbolize both the fertility of the empire's territories and the divine blessing that ensures continued prosperity. The plates and cups are crafted from gold so pure it seems to glow with its own inner light, decorated with enamel work depicting scenes from the lives of Christian saints and the military victories of past emperors. These vessels represent not merely functional objects but artistic statements that transform the simple act of eating into a ceremony that celebrates imperial glory and divine favor. The food itself represents a triumph of imperial logistics and culinary artistry that demonstrates the empire's ability to command resources from every corner of the known world. Fresh fish arrives daily from the Bosphorus, kept alive in specially constructed tanks, until the precise moment of preparation to ensure optimal flavor and texture. Spices flow into the imperial kitchens from India, Ceylon, and the mysterious lands beyond, including cinnamon, cloves, and pepper that literally cost their weight in silver, and must be transported across thousands of miles of dangerous territory by merchants who risk their lives to satisfy aristocratic culinary preferences. The wine comes from specially designated imperial vineyards, stored in cellars carved deep into the living rock beneath the palace, where the temperature remains constant throughout the year and where the aging process can be controlled with scientific precision. But perhaps most exotic of all are the dishes that showcase the empire's connections to the Silk Road and its extensive network of Eastern trading relationships. Your breakfast might include oranges preserved in honey that have traveled from the distant courts of Persia, delicate pastries filled with pistachios from Syria and dates from Mesopotamia, or even more remarkable delicacies that demonstrate the global reach of Byzantine commerce and diplomacy. Sometimes your morning table includes rarities that even other members of the aristocracy have never encountered, such as tea from China carried in specially sealed containers along trade routes so dangerous that only the most experienced and desperate merchants attempt the journey, or exotic fruits from the Indian Ocean islands that arrive preserved in aromatic spirits that add their own layers of complexity to already extraordinary flavors. After your morning meal, you proceed through corridors lined with mosaics, depicting the empire's greatest military victories to reach the Hall of the 19 Couches, where the daily reception ceremony takes place according to protocols, so intricate they require a specialized staff of ceremonial experts to orchestrate properly. This vast chamber, with its soaring dome decorated with images of Christ in majesty and walls covered with scenes of imperial triumph, serves as the stage for one of the most elaborate ceremonial performances in human history. The emperor receives his court according to a system of precedent so complex that it incorporates not only current political relationships but also family lineages, military achievements, religious offices, and the constantly shifting dynamics of imperial favor that can elevate or destroy aristocratic fortunes overnight. Your position within this ceremony reflects not merely your family's accumulated wealth, but your current standing in the intricate web of court politics that determines access to imperial favor, government appointments, and the economic opportunities that flow from proximity to absolute power. The distance at which you stand from the emperor's throne communicates precise information about your political status to every other participant in the ceremony, while the order in which you are acknowledged by imperial officials reveals the subtle hierarchies that govern every aspect of court life. These positions shift constantly based on recent political developments, military successes or failures, religious controversies, and the personal preferences of the emperor and his closest advisors. Yesterday's intimate counselor might find himself relegated to the far edges of the hall, while a previously minor official could suddenly discover himself elevated to a position of unprecedented prominence and influence. The Empress throne itself constitutes a masterpiece of mechanical engineering that borders on the magical, crafted by Arab engineers, captured during the Empire's Eastern military campaigns, and employed in a demonstration of how the Empire transforms even its enemies' expertise into instruments of imperial glory. The throne can rise and fall through hydraulic mechanisms, lifting the Emperor high above the assembled court to emphasize his divine authority and his elevation above ordinary human concerns. Golden lions positioned at the throne's base can roar through concealed mechanical systems that create sounds so realistic they startle even experienced courtiers, while mechanical birds perched in nearby artificial trees sing with voices so lifelike that visitors often search the chamber for living creatures they assume must be hidden somewhere among the elaborate decorations. During these daily receptions, you witness the Empire's global reach made manifest through the parade of foreign ambassadors seeking audience with the Emperor and the presentation of gifts that demonstrate the wealth and sophistication of distant kingdoms. Envoys from the courts of Western Europe arrive, bearing treasures that reflect their region's particular strengths and resources, including amber from the Baltic shores whose golden transparency seems to capture and preserve ancient sunlight, firs from the northern forests so soft and lustrous they feel like touching clouds, and intricate metalwork that demonstrates the developing artistic traditions of kingdoms that still struggle to match Byzantine sophistication in most areas of cultural achievement. Representatives from Arab caliphates present rare manuscripts containing mathematical and astronomical knowledge that acknowledges Islamic intellectual superiority in certain fields, along with mechanical instruments of such precision and ingenuity that they serve as reminders of how much the Empire can learn from its greatest enemies. Most exotic and intriguing of all are the occasional ambassadors from China, whose silk robes and jade ornaments provide tantalizing glimpses of a civilization so distant and sophisticated that it seems almost mythical to Byzantine understanding. These diplomatic encounters offer rare opportunities to observe representatives of the only contemporary civilization that might rival the Empire in terms of cultural achievement, technological sophistication, and administrative complexity. The gifts they present and the ceremonies they perform suggest levels of refinement that both inspire admiration and provoke anxiety about the empire's position in the global hierarchy of civilizations. Their presence serves as a reminder that even the greatest empire exists within a larger world of competing powers and alternative models of human organization. The gift-giving that accompanies these diplomatic exchanges reveals the almost incomprehensible wealth that flows through the imperial court and the sophisticated understanding of symbolic communication that governs international relations. You observe as elaborately decorated chests are opened to reveal pearls from the Persian Gulf, each one so perfectly spherical and lustrous it could serve as a mirror for examining one's reflection. Bolts of silk unfurl in colors so vivid and pure they seem to capture pieces of the rainbow itself, their patterns incorporating design elements that tell stories of distant lands and exotic cultural traditions. Religious relics arrive in containers crafted from carved ivory and precious metals, their spiritual significance rivaled only by their material value and the artistic achievement they represent. Perhaps most fascinating are the technological marvels that arrive as diplomatic gifts or emerge from the empire's own workshops as demonstrations of Byzantine ingenuity and mechanical sophistication. Mechanical clocks track not merely hours and minutes, but the movements of planets across the heavens, incorporating astronomical knowledge and precision engineering that represents the cutting edge of medieval scientific achievement. Automata can write letters in perfect calligraphy, play musical instruments with technical skill that rivals human performers, or execute elaborate dances without any visible operator controlling their movements. These devices represent the intersection of art and science, demonstrating how human creativity can produce objects that seem to transcend the limitations of their material composition and approach the realm of magic through the application of systematic knowledge and meticulous craftsmanship. Your afternoons might be spent in the palace gardens, which represent another dimension of imperial luxury and the systematic application of wealth and expertise to the creation of beauty and sensual pleasure. These are not mere collections of plants, but carefully orchestrated environments designed to create specific emotional and aesthetic effects. Thus, the scientific manipulation of natural elements. Water features throughout the gardens operate through hydraulic systems so sophisticated they can create precisely timed displays, involving multiple fountains, cascades, and artificial rivers that seem to dance in coordination with musical performances or ceremonial processions. The engineering knowledge required to create these effects draws on the same principles used in military siege engines and architectural construction, demonstrating how imperial power can redirect technical expertise from destructive to creative purposes. The plants themselves represent a living catalogue of the empire's global connections and its ability to command resources from every climate and geographic region. Roses from Damascus fill the air with fragrances, so intense they seem almost tangible, their scents carefully calibrated to create emotional responses that enhance the garden's overall aesthetic impact. Fruit trees from Spain and North Africa provide exotic tastes and visual beauty throughout the growing season, their cultivation requiring specialized knowledge of climate control, soil preparation, and horticultural techniques that transform the palace grounds into an artificial paradise. Most prized of all are the botanical specimens that arrive as gifts from foreign rulers, including flowering trees from China that bloom in colors that seem impossible in nature, aromatic herbs from India that serve both culinary and medicinal purposes, and rare succulents from the African interior that appear to store sunlight in their thick leaves and release it as a subtle glow during evening hours. The garden pathways constitute marvels of engineering and artistic achievement that transform simple movement through space into aesthetic and intellectual experiences. The paths are paved with mosaics that tell continuous stories as you walk along carefully planned routes, with each step revealing new scenes and narrative developments that unfold like illuminated manuscripts beneath your feet. Some pathways depict scenes from classical mythology, allowing you to follow the adventures of heroes and gods while enjoying the sensual pleasures of garden strolling. Others showcase the empire's military victories, with each section of pathway bringing new scenes of conquest and triumph that celebrate imperial glory while providing visual entertainment. The most sophisticated paths incorporate optical illusions and perspective kicks that make the gardens seem infinitely larger than their actual dimensions, creating the impression of vast natural landscapes within the confined space of the palace complex. Evening entertainments in the imperial palace push the boundaries of what seems possible in terms of spectacle, luxury, and the systematic pursuit of pleasure through the application of unlimited resources and artistic imagination. The imperial banquet hall can accommodate hundreds of guests, each seated according to a protocol, so complex that teams of specialists spend days planning the seating arrangements for major events while considering political relationships, family lineages, religious affiliations, and the constantly shifting dynamics of court favor that determine social precedents. The hall's acoustics have been engineered with such precision that conversations at one end remained completely inaudible at the other, allowing for the kind of intimate political discussions that actually determine imperial policy, while maintaining the public ceremony that legitimizes imperial authority. The entertainment provided during these elaborate banquets reflects the empire's cultural sophistication and its connections to artistic traditions from throughout the medieval world. The professional musicians perform on instruments crafted from rare woods and precious metals, some of them so technically complex that mastering their performance requires decades of intensive study and practice. The musical compositions themselves incorporate elements from Greek classical traditions, Christian religious themes, and exotic influences from Arab and Persian courts, creating symphonic experiences that demonstrate the cultural synthesis that characterizes Byzantine civilization. Dancers trained from childhood in techniques passed down through generations create performances that combine athletic achievement with artistic expression, their movements precisely choreographed to complement the musical compositions and enhance the overall aesthetic impact of the evening's entertainment. Most spectacular of all are the theatrical performances that recreate historical events or religious stories using elaborate costumes, mechanical effects, and carefully coordinated crowd scenes that transform the banquet hall into a stage for epic drama. These productions require months of preparation and involve hundreds of performers, craftsmen and technical specialists, whose collective efforts create spectacles that rival anything achieved in the ancient world. The costumes alone represent major artistic achievements, incorporating precious metals, exotic fabrics, and jeweled decorations that cost more than most noble families possess in total wealth. The mechanical effects employ the same engineering principles used in the emperor's throne and the garden water features, creating illusions of supernatural intervention and divine presence that blur the boundaries between entertainment and religious experience. But perhaps the evening's most exotic entertainment comes from the empire's extensive collection of trained animals and mechanical marvels that demonstrate both the reach of imperial power and the ingenuity of Byzantine technical achievement. Lions and leopards from Africa perform complex tricks that showcase both their intelligence and their trainers' extraordinary skill in working with dangerous predators. These performances require years of patient training and represent significant financial investments, as the animals must be captured in their native habitats, transported across dangerous territories, and maintained in artificial environments that replicate their natural conditions while allowing for human interaction. Elephants from India participate in elaborate pageants that recreate famous historical battles or mythological scenes, their massive size and intelligence allowing for spectacles that combine live performance with historical education. The mechanical birds and animals scattered throughout the banquet hall spring to life at predetermined moments during the evening, singing with voices that perfectly mimic their living counterparts, roaring with sounds that seem to emerge from real predators, or performing complex movements that demonstrate the sophistication of Byzantine mechanical engineering. These devices represent the intersection of art and technology, combining aesthetic beauty with technical innovation in ways that create wonder and amazement among even the most sophisticated audiences. The knowledge required to construct such mechanisms draws on mathematical principles, engineering techniques, and artistic vision that represent the highest achievements of medieval science and craftsmanship. The wine served during these entertainments represents perhaps the ultimate expression of imperial luxury and the systematic pursuit of perfection in every aspect of aristocratic life. As some vintages come from vineyards that have been producing wine for centuries under imperial patronage, their techniques refined through generations of experimentation to achieve flavors and aromas that exist nowhere else in the world. These wines incorporate not only perfect grape cultivation, but also specialized aging processes that involve storing the bottles in underground chambers carved from living rock, where temperature and humidity can be controlled with scientific precision and where the wine develops complexity and character over periods of decades. Other wines arrive as diplomatic gifts from foreign rulers, carrying with them the distinctive tastes and winemaking traditions of distant lands and offering opportunities to experience the agricultural achievements of other civilizations. The most prized wines in the imperial collection are those produced in the palace's own vineyards using experimental techniques that push the boundaries of viticultural knowledge. and explore the limits of what human ingenuity can achieve in the pursuit of sensual perfection. These wines are made from grapes that grow in soil, specially prepared with exotic ingredients, including crushed pearls that supposedly impart their lustrous quality to the final product, gold dust that adds subtle metallic notes to the wine's flavor profile, and aromatic spices that infuse the grapes with complex fragrances that complement rather than overwhelm their natural characteristics. The resulting wines are so rare and expensive that they are served only during the most important imperial ceremonies, and each bottle represents an investment comparable to the annual income of a prosperous provincial city. The palace's library and scriptorium reveal another dimension of aristocratic luxury that involves the systematic collection and creation of knowledge as a form of wealth that rivals precious metals and exotic materials. Here, teams of highly trained scribes work continuously to copy the great works of classical antiquity, Christian theology, and contemporary scholarship, creating manuscripts that serve simultaneously as intellectual preservation, artistic achievement, and demonstrations of imperial cultural sophistication. The books they produce are masterpieces that combine gold leaf, rare pigments, extracted from exotic sources, and artistic techniques so sophisticated that each volume represents a significant financial investment and requires months or even years of intensive labor to complete. Some of the library's most precious volumes are unique copies of works that exist nowhere else in the world, making them literally irreplaceable treasures that embody centuries of human intellectual achievement. Ancient Greek dramas that would otherwise be lost forever, philosophical treatises that preserve the wisdom of classical antiquity, historical chronicles that record the deeds of past emperors and the lessons they offer for contemporary governance, and scientific works that contain mathematical and astronomical knowledge, essential for maintaining the empire's technological superiority. The aristocrats who fund this preservation work understand that they are accumulating not merely beautiful objects but the intellectual foundation of their entire civilization, ensuring that future generations will have access to the accumulated wisdom and artistic achievements that distinguish civilized life from barbarian existence. The scholars who work in the Imperial Library represent an international community of intellectual achievement that transcends political boundaries and religious differences. Greek philosophers fleeing Islamic persecution work alongside Arab mathematicians seeking imperial patronage, while Western European clerics study Byzantine theological traditions and contribute their own scholarly insights to ongoing intellectual debates. This cosmopolitan intellectual environment produces new knowledge that synthesizes different cultural traditions, creating innovations in philosophy, science, and artistic technique that advance human understanding while serving imperial political and military objectives. The library becomes a center of learning that influences educational institutions throughout the Mediterranean world and helps maintain the empire's reputation for cultural sophistication and intellectual leadership. Yet for all its magnificence and cultural achievement, life among the Byzantine elite carries its own distinctive forms of danger and uncertainty that shadow even the most privileged existence and create psychological pressures that wealth and luxury cannot entirely alleviate. The same political processes that can elevate a family to unprecedented heights of wealth and influence can just as quickly destroy them entirely, alienating in a matter of days or weeks fortunes that required generations to accumulate and social positions that seemed permanently secure. The history of the Byzantine court is littered with the ruins of once great families who miscalculated in the deadly game of imperial politics, choosing the wrong side in succession disputes, supporting unsuccessful military commanders, or simply attracting too much imperial attention through excessive displays of wealth and independence. Imperial paranoia about potential threats to dynastic stability means that success itself becomes a form of danger for aristocratic families, as emperors regularly eliminate those whose wealth, connections, or popularity might provide the foundation for future rebellion or usurpation attempts. The same qualities that enable aristocratic success, including intelligence, ambition, military skill, and political connections, also mark their possessors as potential threats to imperial security. This creates a paradoxical situation where the most capable and successful nobles face the greatest risks, while survival often depends on maintaining a careful balance between useful service and dangerous prominence that requires constant attention and sophisticated political judgment. The psychological toll of this constant uncertainty shapes every aspect of aristocratic life and creates forms of stress and anxiety that no amount of material comfort can entirely eliminate. Despite their access to the finest foods, the most beautiful surroundings, and the most sophisticated entertainments available in the medieval world. The empire's elite live in a state of perpetual vigilance about their political standing and future security. Every conversation might be reported to imperial spies. Every alliance might prove to be a trap designed to expose potential disloyalty. Every gesture of independence might be interpreted as evidence of treasonous ambition. The same eunuchs who provide intimate personal service might also be gathering information for competing factions within the court, creating an atmosphere of suspicion that undermines the trust necessary for genuine human relationships. This pervasive paranoia extends even to family relationships and domestic life, as marriage alliances and inheritance disputes become matters of political, as well as personal significance that can determine the survival or destruction of entire family lines. Children are raised from birth to understand that their personal desires and romantic preferences must always be subordinated to family political strategy and imperial service. Love marriages become rare luxuries that few aristocratic families can afford, as most unions are calculated moves in the ongoing chess game of court politics, where emotional satisfaction must yield to strategic advantage. Even parent-child relationships suffer under the pressure of political considerations, as fathers must sometimes sacrifice their children's happiness or safety to maintain family political position, while children learn to view their parents' affection as conditional on their contribution to family political success. The aristocratic families that survive and prosper over multiple generations develop elaborate strategies for managing these political dangers, while maintaining their material comfort and social position within the imperial hierarchy. Some families pursue geographic diversification, maintaining estates and business interests throughout the empire, so that local political disasters or regional rebellions cannot destroy their entire economic foundation. But this approach requires sophisticated management systems and trusted agents who can operate independently while remaining loyal to family interests, creating extended networks of obligation and mutual support that function like private governments parallel to official imperial administration. Other families cultivate relationships with multiple competing factions within the court, positioning themselves to survive changes in imperial favor by maintaining connections to all potential winners in political disputes. The strategy demands exceptional diplomatic skill and the ability to appear loyal to contradictory positions without being detected as fundamentally uncommitted to any particular faction. The most successful aristocratic families become masters of political ambiguity, supporting all sides in political disputes until outcomes become clear, and then claiming to have always favored the winning faction. This approach requires careful documentation of communications, sophisticated intelligence networks that provide early warning of political developments, and the ability to construct plausible explanations for apparently contradictory behavior. Such families often maintain separate correspondence systems and financial arrangements that allow them to deny connections to failed political movements, while emphasizing their support for successful ones. The psychological cost of this constant deception and calculation can be enormous, as family members must often suppress their genuine convictions and personal loyalties in favor of strategic considerations that prioritize survival over integrity. Yet, despite these challenges and the constant anxieties they create, the aristocratic life of Byzantium represents one of history's greatest achievements in terms of cultural refinement, artistic patronage, and the systematic pursuit of beauty and intellectual sophistication. The palaces, church manuscripts, and artistic treasures created during the empire's golden ages continue to inspire wonder and admiration more than a millennium after their creation, demonstrating humanity's capacity for creating environments and experiences that transcend the practical necessities of survival and reach toward higher forms of meaning and value. The lifestyle of the Byzantine elite shows what becomes possible when wealth, education, and artistic vision combine with political stability and cultural continuity over extended periods of time. The patronage system that supports Byzantine artistic and intellectual achievement creates opportunities for talent from every level of society to contribute to cultural development and receive recognition for exceptional ability. Skilled craftsmen can rise to positions of influence and wealth through their contributions to imperial projects, while scholars and artists from humble backgrounds gain access to resources and audiences that would otherwise remain far beyond their reach. This system of merit-based advancement, despite its limitations and the political dangers it involves, creates incentives for excellence and innovation that benefit the entire empire, while ensuring that artistic and intellectual traditions continue to develop rather than stagnating under the weight of inherited privilege. As night falls over Constantinople, and the palace settles into its evening routines. The contrast between different levels of Byzantine society becomes most apparent and poignant, and the servants' quarters, eunuchs like those described in our first segment, prepare for another day of careful navigation through political dangers, and the constant effort required to maintain their positions within the imperial hierarchy, and the monastic communities scattered throughout the city. Monks tend to the religious treasures they preserved during the Iconoclastic persecutions, while maintaining the spiritual traditions that provide meaning and continuity in an often chaotic world. And the aristocratic apartments, the empire's elite retire to bedchambers filled with luxury beyond the imagination of their subjects, surrounded by beautiful objects and comfortable furnishings that represent the accumulated wealth and cultural achievement of centuries of imperial success. Yet all of these worlds exist within the same imperial system, and remain connected by bonds of mutual dependence and shared participation in the grand experiment of Byzantine civilization. So, the eunuch's faithful service makes possible the aristocrat's comfort and security, while the monk's preservation of religious and intellectual traditions provides the cultural foundation that legitimizes aristocratic privilege and imperial authority. So, the aristocrat's patronage funds the artistic and architectural achievements that define the empire's cultural legacy, while their political and military leadership provides the stability necessary for cultural development and intellectual achievement. This interdependence creates a complex social ecosystem where each level depends on the others for survival and success, despite the obvious inequalities and tensions that characterize their relationships. The material splendor that surrounds aristocratic life serves purposes that extend beyond mere personal comfort or ostentatious display, functioning instead as a form of political communication that demonstrates imperial power and cultural sophistication to both domestic and foreign audiences. The elaborate ceremonies, expensive clothing, and exotic entertainments send messages about the empire's wealth, stability, and global connections that influence diplomatic negotiations and military planning. Foreign ambassadors who witness aristocratic lifestyle return to their own courts with reports that affect their rulers' assessments of Byzantine strength and their willingness to challenge imperial interests. The investment in luxury thus serves strategic purposes that justify its enormous cost and help maintain the empire's position in the competitive medieval world. The cultural achievements that emerge from aristocratic patronage create lasting value that outlives the political circumstances that made them possible, demonstrating how the pursuit of beauty and intellectual excellence can produce benefits that extend far beyond their original context. The architectural innovations developed for imperial palaces influenced church construction throughout the Christian world, while the artistic techniques perfected in aristocratic workshops spread to other regions through trade and diplomatic contact. The literary and philosophical works produced in the imperial library contribute to intellectual developments that affect European thought for centuries, while the legal and administrative innovations developed for managing aristocratic wealth provide models for governmental organization that influence political development throughout the Mediterranean world. Tonight, as you settle into your own comfortable surroundings, far removed from the struggles and splendors of medieval Constantinople, you might reflect on the strange alchemy that transformed human ambition, suffering, creativity, and determination into the golden age of Byzantine civilization. The stories we have explored together throughout this journey, the castrated servants who learned to navigate impossible political circumstances, the theatrical empress who transformed herself into an effective ruler, the religious communities that preserved their traditions despite official persecution, and the aristocratic elite who created environments of unprecedented luxury and cultural sophistication, all remind us that history's greatest achievements often emerge from the most complex mixtures of human experience and the most unlikely combinations of circumstances. The palace halls are empty now, their mechanical marvels silent in the darkness, their golden decorations reflecting only moonlight through ancient windows that have witnessed centuries of human drama. But the human stories they contain continue to echo across the millennia, offering us glimpses into worlds both alien and familiar, reminding us of the endless capacity for both cruelty and beauty, both destruction and creation, that defines the human experience in every generation. In the gentle contemplation of these distant lives and the civilizations they created and sustained, we find not merely entertainment or historical knowledge, but wisdom about the enduring patterns that shape all human societies, and insight into the possibilities that remain available to those who combine vision with determination and individual talent with collective purpose. Sleep well, knowing that the struggles and triumphs of past generations have paved the way for the relative peace and security we enjoy today. The Byzantine Empire eventually fell, its palaces crumbled into ruins, its treasures scattered across museums and private collections throughout the world, but the human spirit that created and preserved its greatest achievements lives on in every generation that chooses to learn from the past, to honor the memory of those who came before, and to build toward a future that incorporates the lessons of history with the possibilities of human creativity and cooperation. The golden light of ancient wisdom continues to shine through the darkness of time, offering guidance and inspiration to all who seek to understand what humans can accomplish when they dedicate themselves to purposes greater than individual survival and immediate gratification.